Welcome to What's in Store with Carly and Chris, the show where we cover hot topics at the cross-section of retail and real estate. I'm your host, Carly Iacono, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Ressa. Chris, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today? Feeling energized? Back from Vegas? You recovered?
Yeah, I'm recovered from Vegas. Got a good workout in this morning. Feeling good.
All right.
Yeah.
I had my Celsius, no workout, but I'm ready to go as well. So
Are you a Celsius person?
do what it takes. It's a guilty addiction. Yes, I love Celsius.
Really? So every once in a while, I'll have, like in our little cafeteria in our office building, they sell it. Like it's the only time I've ever had it. I've probably had 3 in my life. I know it's no sugar, but I don't have a sugary sweet tooth. I'm like a decadent chocolate type of guy. If I'm going to have a sweet tooth, I'm not a Sour Patch Kid,
Right.
Skittles type person.
Me either.
And so it's even that it's so sweet to me. I'm just not, give me bitter coffee that tastes so bitter that most can't handle it. That's what I like.
Okay, I'm going to tell you my quick life hack, and then we really, got to get to it. But since you asked, here's my life hack. I take my Celsius and I put it in a giant bottle of water, so the powdered Celsius. So I am drinking a huge bottle of water before I can get all of the caffeine. And
I got it.
It's a happy mix. Good way to start the day.
Yes. I've seen the health buzz of that you should, water before coffee in the morning. I've seen
Now
that.
it's combined, right? Best of both
Or
worlds.
now it's combined.
Right, I'm just
Yes.
really glad we could share that with everyone this morning. I'm sure everyone listening is happy they now know our caffeine routines, and I hope that helps you, whoever is listening and wanting to change their morning routine. All right, so let's get to it. So we came through ICSC. It was an absolutely fantastic conference. And I know we say that basically every year, but it felt extra energized this year. Full 25,000 people there, nonstop. Some new things about the show, right? ICSC+PROPTech, ICSC Women, new format. It was really, really exciting. And today we're going to cover some of the key themes in our conversation. So sort of an ICSC recap from both of our perspectives and just kind of share what we learned during the conference. But before we jump in, let's just touch on our prediction episode, which was, maybe a month ago, where we went through what we were expecting to happen at ICSC Vegas. And Chris, how do you think we did?
I think we nailed it. I mean, we talked about that demand was going to be at an all-time high for buyers, for tenants, and it felt like that. We talked about the return of the operator on the landlord side. We talked about, some financial engineering is not the way forward and really operating and maximizing NOI, and that's what we meant by return of the operator. And we talked about how that we thought AI was going to be a big discussion, and it certainly was for a lot of people.
I agree. So we were spot on. We're just so good at this. I mean, gosh, modesty is overflowing today. Okay, so those were good predictions. I feel like they all came true. I have to agree with you. Those were themes of conversations, but there were a few more. So that's why we wanted to kind of reconnect today and share a recap to make sure we're covering as much of the content as we can. So let's go into the first one, and this was a really big one for you. I know you're very excited about it, so I'm just gonna say what it is, and then you go because this is a big deal to you. So tenants are heavily investing in their stores and in TI, which is materially changing net effective rents for landlords. So tell me why and what that really looks like in real time.
So take a step back. I think one of the common themes that I heard in many of my conversations was the amount of capital retailers are deploying into physical real estate. And I literally heard the B word, billions, in multiple meetings. Yeah, our CapEx budget for physical retail real estate is in the billions this year. Now, that includes existing portfolio, that includes new stores, but just the amount of pure dollars investing in stores I think that tells a lot about the conviction about the future of physical stores. I think it talks about the conviction about their individual businesses. And that's all good for real estate, for you, for your own, your buyers and sellers. No one ever got hurt because the retailer wanted to spend more money in their store. And that's usually a good thing. It's good for the consumer. It's, good for the retailer. It's good for the landlord. The amount of investment was really eye-opening for me, that so many retailers were investing such significant dollars, or they're planning to.
Now,
and so when you break that...
New stores, though, or is this renovation of existing stores? Like, what's the breakdown between the two, would you say?
I don't have a breakdown. I don't know that... I'm not sure a breakdown matters all that much, to be quite honest. I think the concept that retailers are investing in stores, to me, is significant. And what caught me was just the amount of dollars they are investing in stores, right? We had this, period of time where, dollars went into digital infrastructure, this 08 to 2019. And then we had, COVID, and so much went into supply chain logistics and inventory management and transportation. And now all those things have settled out, and now they're, especially strong retailers, they're doubling down on stores and they're reinvesting in stores. And again, that does include new growth. And in a tight real estate market, I think, as we are in retail real estate, one of the things we kept hearing and we're seeing at scale is this take shape in new stores as well, where retailers are deciding that a good place to put their capital is into new stores. And what that does is that lowers the cost to install a tenant for the landlord. The total dollar amount to open a store hasn't changed in the last 2 weeks.
It's probably
What's
gone
changed,
up, actually.
What's changed is the burden of who is taking on that liability, or that expense, I should say. And for 2008 to 2019, the majority of that burden was on landlords. That's shifting, and what that's doing is, DLC, we put out a white paper that the rent is next. And if you read it, right, we're saying rent growth is going to happen. But what's really happening, what hasn't happened in a while, because of the rise in construction cost, is the net effect of rent growing. And we're seeing dramatic improvement in net effect of rent, even when the face rent of a deal isn't improving all that jaw-dropping, in a jaw-dropping way. What's improving is the net effect of rent, and that's because the cost to install the tenant is different. So I put this all in the same bucket of, I think the concept that retailers are investing in their stores, whether that's remodels, new stores, I think it's all good and it all matters. And one is not better than the other, even though from a macro perspective, on some micro, sure, some investor wants to make sure that they can, get as high as rent and at as low as cost as possible. But on a macro level, as a state of the industry, there's just as much power in investing in an existing fleet as there is in new stores. And, as you have some old tired stores, them getting refreshed, re-energized, increases traffic, really helps the physical plant of the entire property. And I think it's good for everyone. So yeah, my top takeaway was I was astounded by the amount of capital that retailers are talking about putting into physical retail. And, I didn't hear a ton about that. We're changing our inventory management systems. I didn't hear a ton about, we have to move, logistic plants and open DCs. And I didn't hear a ton about all this capital going into the back end of their new e-commerce site, because that's all been spent and that's all up and running.
I think really the perspective that this is a change in net effective rents is unique. And that's the point that kind of struck me when you were talking about this. Because yes, investors always win when tenants are improving their spaces, improving the properties. I think the industry wins when more money is being reinvested back into the stores. But that you would look at it as a landlord as a net effective rent and not just a cost savings up front, I think is an interesting shift. I will say, to play devil's advocate a bit, it's not going to be a long-term benefit to your NOI. So if you were to be a short-term hold, which I know you're not, and want to flip out of a deal, the higher rent on the front end is going to be more meaningful to your NOI. So I think if you're holding a property, that's an amazing way to look at the benefit of the tenant investing in their own stores. But if your goal is to get the true net rent, right, you're going to want that to be looked at a little bit differently. I think the message
I would challenge that a bit.
Is true, but okay, tell me.
I would challenge that. If we have a coffee shop and you buy the land for $1 million, example, and it costs $2 million to build it. So you're in for $3 million. Well, let's just say it's a 6 cap, just for my example, and that rent is $200,000. Well, we'll do the math. 200,000 divided by 0.06. It's $3.3 million, the value of that property. Well, I spent $2 million in construction, $1 million for land, and now the building's worth 3.3. After transaction costs, you would break even on that deal.
Right.
So now I take that, I could get the rent up, even if I got the rent up $10 a foot, right? And so now I've gone from $200,000 in NOI to $220,000 in NOI, assuming a 2,000-foot building. I take $220,000, and we'll do the math, divided by 0.06. I'm at 3.6, a little better deal, right? I'm all in for $3 million. Now it's worth 3.6. But let's keep the $3 million mark, and let's just say I paid $1 million for the land, but I went to the tenant, and now they're going to contribute $1 million to the building, and I'm going to contribute $1 million to the building. And so now I'm only in the deal for $2 million.
For
and
sure.
so my net effective rent is much higher now. My net effective rent is much higher, and the value is higher, even though I didn't get higher face rent.
I think your profit is higher, right? But what I was saying is, especially if you're in a multi-tenant situation where you're not tying it exactly to construction costs and land value, a single tenant's much simpler for the example. But I think even in your example, your profit's higher, and the differential in the rent was not enough to make up for what the tenant was contributing in your example. But if you have a shopping center and you're paying less, right, to put the tenant in, but you're accepting a lower rent, 5 years from now, that could materially affect the value. But again, it's all an equation, as you just showed. So I think your point is...
So for the second owner, sure. But for the person who's... My point was, whether I hold it or I sell it immediately and flip it,
you think it's
for
a net
me as
benefit
that
either
person,
way.
I'm either, my net effective rent is increased as well as my value in the example I gave.
Right.
Obviously, that's that example I gave.
So I think let's just roll up our sleeves. We're going to debate underwriting today. We're not going through any more predictions. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go.
No, but I think the concept is sound. There's just going to be some differential between long-term NOI and a shorter term like expense savings, right, that are one time when you're putting the tenant in. So it's not quite as straightforward, I would say, as you're saying, but I think it's still clearly a net positive the more that the tenant wants to contribute, as long as they're not decreasing rent to compensate, which it doesn't sound like they are, right? Rent levels.
Face rents aren't going down.
Exactly.
Face rents
So
face rents are still rising.
That's
right
the
now.
key there, right? If they're not discounting rent, but they're contributing more to the store, then of course it's going to be a net positive to the landlord.
Yeah,
if we
I
saw
think
that
face rents are
shift,
still rising.
that's the concern. But amazing
Yeah.
news that tenants are investing in their stores, and the fact that we're talking about billions, or you were. I don't know that I had any $1 billion conversations. I gotta step up my game for next ICSC. But I think
Well,
that's
I would say there
crazy,
was some
right?
articles. There were some articles of like before ICSC talking about like retailer investment into real estate, and but it was like it was really consolidated into like a couple of retailers, Walmart, Target, and some of the major retailers. But the amount of retailers I heard who were spending so much on their physical stores was just astounding to me.
So, Chris, let's move on to our second insight from the show. And this one is wild to me. Cap rates and interest rates have seemingly decoupled. I don't know about you, but it is really hard to make sense of pricing in some cases. We've got really compressed cap rates, and then we have widening cap rates on the other side, all while interest rates are just kind of doing their own thing and creeping up. So, what do you think this is because of? And do you think this is a long term trend or just a blip given market conditions?
I so I don't know that they've totally decoupled, but there's definitely they're slightly less correlated than they used to be, and I think some old school macroeconomics are driving the bus here, and it's supply and demand, and there's more capital interested in investing in retail assets than there are retail assets available to buy. And just like any other market, supply and demand drives pricing. And I think that's pushing cap rates down. And despite interest rates slightly moving up or potentially having, the prediction that they might move because of inflation or what have you, supply and demand is the driving force, right? And so I think, when in volatile capital markets, I think that's when like the real operators win. And obviously, you make a blanket statement like cap rates are coming down. That it depends on what type of asset, who the credit behind the asset, all the things matter. None of that doesn't matter. It all matters. But generally speaking, there's pricing pressure for buyers right now. And, I think the supply and demand and the amount of people who are really interested in investing in retail because of how strong the fundamentals is winning.
I think the conversations changed though. There used to be, not of course across the board, but there was a spread above interest rates that was just kind of logical and was reflective of the risk in the deal. And that spread was different, whether you were talking about a 2 year, single tenant discount store in a tertiary market, or you're talking about a single tenant grocery store in a prime market, right? The spread over interest rates was different. The conversation though now is not how many basis points over interest rates are things trading in what category. It's here's where they're trading, and we hope interest rates come down, right? And I do think this kind of ties into our prediction that we made in the last episode that it's an operator game now. The operators are winning, and we're not modeling in cap rate compression because the way we look at assets has fundamentally changed. And maybe we've gone back to the beginning. So I'm not saying this is anything new, but we're looking at retail real estate as income producing properties that require working the property, right? You can't just set it and forget it and hope cap rates come down. So, because it's become an operator driven asset class instead of financial engineering, I guess it makes sense that the conversation would not center around interest rates the way that it has in the past. But it seems to be, I would say, more separate than even I was expecting, especially in the single tenant world. I mean, we're seeing assets trade at 5 caps as rates creep up, right? And then on the other side, we're seeing some cap rate expansion. So I think to your point, it's less about financial engineering and more about supply and demand and levers that operators can pull over time that might affect the price they're willing to pay on the front end. Would you agree with that?
I think largely I agree. I would add on the operator piece, like you have to work it. However, if you know how to actually, operate retail assets, the opportunities to increase NOI and increase the value of the asset are robust right now because of how strong the fundamentals at the real estate level retail properties are doing. And to me, that's exciting.
And net effective rents, right, are going up. We just covered that. So however you look at it, it's a win for the landlord. So perhaps that is allowing them to be a little more competitive on pricing on the acquisition in some cases.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, our third takeaway we kind of already touched on, but this is a big one, that AI was part of every conversation. Now, you and I were part of the PropTech conference. We were on a panel. We were speaking multiple times. So it could be that this was at the forefront, right, of our agenda. But even in the investor meetings at the conference, show floor, it came up in all of my meetings. What tools are you using? How are you using it? What's the return? What's it look like for your business day to day? So I think ICSC did a great job of bringing this to the forefront, but it really was not the whole meeting, but it was part of most of the conversations. Was that the case for you as well? I'm guessing yes.
Yeah, I ended up talking about AI in many of our retailer conversations. And oftentimes it's not about, well, how are you changing company workflows and whatnot? I think people just are human and they want to talk about, are you using it for health and wellness at all? Are you using it for like time management? What are you doing with it? Do you have any great prompts? Like that was a lot of the conversation. Yeah, it came up like, how are you aggregating and integrating data seamlessly to, improve workflows and reduce efficiencies? But I think the more compelling and more interesting use cases are how people are using it in their everyday life, both and crossing the boundaries of personal and professional, because I think that's going to make work-life balance a lot better for people. And that's what a lot of the conversations were about that I had about AI. I'm in the conversations a lot about AI on aggregating data and how do we improve efficiencies and workflows and all that stuff and get systems to talk to each other and all that stuff. But I think, to me, the more interesting and more compelling conversation is the more human element of how human beings are using it personally for both their professional and personal world, and how those are melding in AI platforms, and how I think there's some opportunities to enhance work-life balance because of that.
I think it makes sense that we would start with the personal side, right? Because it's much easier to affect change in your household typically than it is in an organization with many
Sure.
stakeholders and different angles. So that's like the beta, that's the starting ground, right? Where you kind of test and try, and does this work? Does that work? How do I prompt? How do I get efficiency from it? So I think that just speaks to the infancy that we're in, again, with AI, that we're just trying to figure it out in small ways in our personal lives and connect with other people and see what they're doing too, so that perhaps we can make change, throughout our organizations as well. And it's a lot more
Yep.
fun sometimes to talk about the personal use cases than the business ones. So
Totally.
makes sense. And I hope you have optimized your health and fitness and vitamins and all of that, because
Oh, thank you.
that's base case. Not because you need it, but just because I bet you'd enjoy that side of it. All right, let's go to one more that I thought was really interesting. And I feel like single tenant healthcare real estate is becoming the new QSR from 10 years ago. There is such a proliferation of dental, of dialysis, of dermatology uses, right? This MedTel concept coming to retail, that it was pretty amazing, really. And these are primarily PE roll-ups with varying degrees of financial, whatever, stability, I guess, or backing. But there's this new push to continue to get healthcare closer to the consumer, and everyone's trying to figure out how much we can push that, right? How many dental offices can you put in one region, and what's the overlap, and what's that look like? it's really emerged as, I guess, a very forefront asset type within net lease. So I think healthcare as a new QSR was an interesting takeaway that I saw. Have you been talking with any healthcare tenants for any of your centers, or is that not a
I
fit with your
mean,
other tenant mix?
we've done a ton of MedTel throughout the years, as well as deals with major healthcare systems, and so nothing. I didn't get anything that like really was new. And when you brought this up to me, I was fascinated and I had a million questions. So I'm going to start. So, were there more groups like coming to you saying, "Hey, I have this net lease healthcare tenant that I want you to list for us," and that type of thing? How was this coming up for you?
Yeah, I think there's definitely more that are under construction, and they're saying, what are the exit cap rates? Or we want to build
Oh,
15
wow.
of these this year. What do you think that looks like? And we're having conversations about lease structure, right? Typically they're double net, but there's a push in the market from investors to prioritize absolute net, right? And so what does that look like for the tenant? And if you're a developer, how much do you push your tenant? Because you don't want to risk losing that relationship, but yet you want the lease form to be as attractive as possible for resale. So that's kind of a pinch point right now is lease structure, rent level. Of course, you want the rent to be as high as possible if you're a developer so that you can make the most profit and cover costs, but you still need to be able to sell that. And there's an inflection point in the market too, where rent is too high from the buyer perspective. So just kind of understanding what the appetite from the end investor might be and how these deals should be structured from a single tenant basis was, I think, an interesting conversation this year.
Yeah, I didn't have conversations like that. I had what I would say meetings with some of the traditional MedTel tenants, large major institutions who are healthcare businesses in retail formats, but not the same type of conversations. I'm curious, were there any similarities in markets that you were talking to people in about these, or was it just everywhere and just healthcare is truly the new QSR because QSRs are obviously everywhere? Because that would be fascinating and exciting to me if that starts to come to fruition. I start seeing a lot more OMs of these net lease healthcare facilities.
Yeah, I don't think I have like a short list of markets. I mean, obviously, dense areas with affluent populations are pretty obvious targets, but there wasn't there wasn't a strategy that emerged, around we only want to be in the top 10 core MSAs in the country. I didn't hear that. It was more, I think, where there's not overlap and where there's opportunity, and that seemed to be a bit different, but we didn't get that granular.
Was there more Sunbelt than not?
Well, I think Sunbelt is always the answer just because it's so much easier to get approvals. Construction
Yeah.
costs are lower, land costs are lower. So I, to me, Sunbelt is the answer for developers, but not necessarily tenants. And I think that's an interesting distinction. It's the answer for developers because they can find a place to build, right? They can find a timeline that works. They can find a cost structure that works and the deal will pencil. You go to the Northeast, the tenants want to be here. The buyers would love to buy product, but it's very difficult to find land. It's a very slow approval process. Costs are very high. So I don't necessarily think it's where do we think these concepts would be successful. It's where can they be built efficiently is what's driving it.
Got it. Helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anytime. Let's move to our last one. And this was just an overarching kind of, I think, really nice sentiment that I left the conference with, and hopefully you did too. We had 25,000 people register for ICSC. Those were their final numbers, just over 25,000. I mean, that is just mind-boggling number of people. And everywhere we went, the PropTech, sessions, the women in commercial real estate, the booths, everything was packed. People were there. They were going to the panels. They were having conversations. All the events were maxed out everywhere we went. And people were genuinely, it seemed like, having a great time talking and connecting and being in person. And by the flurry of post ICSC that you saw on LinkedIn and so forth, I think you kind of see the energy and the joy that connecting brought people. And to tie this back to retail real estate, I think the fact that we are so hungry for in real life experiences and we're so excited when people actually get together as an industry, bodes very well for physical stores and physical retail long term, right? It's almost like the more digitized we become, the more important in real life becomes and bricks and mortar will become. So it's the opposite of e-commerce taking down the industry. I think it's going to make it stronger.
Nailed it. I have nothing better to add to that. But I would say I am curious. So like, at the conference, I don't know, our booth is in the South Hall. I don't know where your booth is. Central. And so are you taking most of your meetings at CBRE's booth?
Okay, so I had to be very strategic about it just for the time to get around the convention center. So the morning, the first half of the day was blocked at the CBRE booth, and the afternoon was visiting clients in South Hall.
Got
so
it.
I saw both.
And then do you go to the parties? Do you do dinners? Do you do both? Do you have other events?
Yes to all of it.
Okay.
Chronic overscheduler. So we'll do cocktail meetings before, dinners, events after, meetings in the morning. So I don't like to miss anything. So yes.
Okay. Got it.
You as well?
And you saw, so my schedule, on Saturday, I did a podcast at the SiriusXM studios, which was pretty cool.
Neat.
Then on Sunday, I had my big thing on Sunday. I had some meetings, but I had a dinner with retailers, and a PAC event, which was ICSC PAC. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but a PAC event. Then Monday had meetings, the PropTech thing, and then Tuesday, Wednesday was just meetings at our booth. I didn't have any meetings outside of our booth, which was nice.
It's efficient to be able to stay in one place for sure.
Yeah.
It's either going to do it that way or you've got to block and minimize the walk time. But
yeah. A lot of the retailers, what they did was one day they were doing Central Hall, one day they were doing South Hall. So I got a lot of emails back from retailers when scheduling when they were like, yeah, I'm going to be in the South Hall on this day. I'll be in, so I can meet with you at these times. Yeah.
Well, I mean, with 25,000 people, you really do have to plan ahead if you want to get someone's attention. So that's a big part of it too, is all the work that goes into it leading up to it.
For sure. All right.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for tuning in to all of our listeners. We appreciate you. And that was this episode of What's in Store with Carly and Chris. We hope to see you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.